Social media makes us all into our own press secretaries, managing our own images, making releases, commenting on current events, protecting our brand. And the quickest way to perform your identity is to get outraged and to display the outrage as a sign of your righteousness. All anger is righteous, after all. It's just that most is self-righteous. So let me pick out one story from the last week and show you we were all angry and we were all performing. On February the 18th, 2019, Jordan Peterson was speaking in Auckland, New Zealand. Afterwards, he had his photo taken with 150 VIPs who had paid for a few seconds of meet and greet with him. Did you catch it? Did you see him? Did you read the t-shirt? Did you understand it? I don't think Peterson did either. That guy, did you notice the perhaps deliberate misspelling of Islamophobia on his t-shirt? Apparently that's a thing, to be distinguished from Islamophobia. Did you know that? Did you do the research? Did you notice the reasons for his objections to Islam? It's because apparently he's against, among other things, misogyny and homophobia and female genital mutilation. The final line of the t-shirt says he wants the right to hate Islam, but not the individual. His t-shirt even had footnotes. Did you consult the footnotes? Now, this is not a t-shirt I would ever wear. It's not something I would recommend anyone else wear, ever. But for the last week, I've been watching as people have asked, did you see that t-shirt? Peterson should have noticed that t-shirt, all the while they themselves did not really pay attention to it. This is a familiar scenario. We have an image online, and some people want you to notice just enough of the image to be offended, but not enough to understand. That's social media right there. We say, here, look at this. Look at it. Isn't it appalling? Isn't it shocking? Do you denounce this? Do you disavow? I need your answer now. But the same social media is not interested in really looking, in asking questions, in getting the context. We want to know just enough to get offended, but not enough to understand. Now, I do not like that t-shirt. I don't like the performative anger he is trading in, not one little bit. But if you're going to smear Peterson with being in a photo with that t-shirt, it's incumbent upon you to understand what you're denouncing. So anyway, the photo happens, and no one notices really until 4 weeks later, a white supremacist kills 50 Muslims in New Zealand. And notice this, the racist was performing for an audience, a social media audience of millions. So the man in the t-shirt was performing, the terrorist was performing, and the rest of social media went to work performing too. Whitcoulls, New Zealand's largest bookseller, pulls Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, off the shelves, saying it's in the light of some extremely disturbing material being circulated prior, during, and after the Christchurch attacks. They mean the photo. So they pull the book and continue to sell Mein Kampf. True story. They continue, as a business which takes our responsibility to our communities very seriously, we believe it would be wrong to support the author at this time. They are performing. But it's not just them. The Faculty of Divinity at Cambridge University decided to use this moment to rescind an invitation to Peterson, and to do so via Twitter. In fact, the Cambridge Student Union broke the news on Twitter first, 3 hours before the Divinity faculty. The Student Union said with great relief, Jordan Peterson's views are not representative of the student body, and as such, we don't see his visit as a valuable contribution to the university. I mean, God forbid that they hear from a teacher who does not represent their already impeccable views. But it's performance. Performance by the Student Union, performance by the Faculty of Divinity, who did not tweet the offer of the fellowship, but they did make much of their virtuous rescinding. And then the performance has continued, with a response from Peterson calling the publicising of the rescindment narcissistic, self-congratulatory, and devious. He spoke about their propaganda-addled souls and called them cowards and mountebanks. He said of the faculty, I wish them the continued decline in relevance over the next few decades that they deeply deserve and profoundly and diligently work towards and deserve. Now, I get the anger. So much of it is justified, but I also know Cambridge people, impressive theologians, who have offered Peterson precisely what he was seeking from the faculty, an opportunity to study Exodus with the best and brightest that biblical studies has to offer. But after Peterson's blog post, it would be an almost impossible climb down for him now to accept such offers. I get that Peterson has been a victim of many angry posts written by others, but I fear he will be a victim of his own anger too. One of the secrets to his success online has been the channeling of his anger, very often righteously directed. But if we've learnt anything from the New Testament, then let's hear the book of James. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. That link between anger and righteousness is interesting. All anger is righteous. It comes from a desire for justice. All anger is righteous. It's just that far too much of it is self-righteous. And in this online age, it's easy to become performative. From the t-shirt to the celebrity photo opportunity to its weaponization online to the book withdrawn to Cambridge University's tweet to Jordan Peterson's response, we are all angry, we're all performing, and social media is supercharging this outrage machine. But anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I'm Glen Scrivener, this is Speak Life, and you're watching the LIVEcast. LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show. LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Welcome to the show, indeed. Good to have you with us.
For the very last time in these studios.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a sad day, but
yeah,
I mean, really, we can't wait to be out of here.
Nobody really likes
the
colour or
even, would
the
you
presenters.
Was it kind of turquoise?
Is it? Yes,
blue,
powder blue,
bluey,
powder blue.
Yeah, it's not very nice, is it?
Yeah.
So yeah, soon as of Monday, we have a new bit of building work going on, and this room will no longer exist.
Basically, every single wall is going to be hacked through, and the back half of our offices, which was an old Brethren church, but the back half of our offices will be entirely devoted to studio space. So hopefully we'll have, at the end of this process, a really nice studio.
Yep. Hopefully it will just make our life a bit easier, and we'll be able to make some good bits with it. And we're particularly looking forward to September time with the interns coming on board and having a bigger team. Hopefully all these things together will just mean that we'll be able to push out more stuff more quickly. Yeah.
And so the LIVEcast shot on proper cameras rather than the webcams that we've got here. And so you'll be able to see us in HD.
We might even have a proper set, something to actually sit on rather than just sitting here.
Yeah.
We should get people, because we're still wondering really what we should...
Right.
What should the set be?
What should the set be?
Where should we be?
Where should the fern be placed?
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Are we in deck chairs on a Hawaiian beach? That kind of thing, you know.
We totally could be. Or we could look, really grown up with newspapers on the coffee table.
Oh, yeah, the broadsheets.
Yes, yes.
Just...
and then the theme music, and we shuffle our pages, and it's all possible. So stick with us. Really interesting times are ahead, especially with the interns. I mean, I did a calculation the other day that if we have, let's say, 3 interns, and that's looking quite likely, then we would be able to, I think, triple our output. In terms of Dan Rackham being able to give half a week, you giving half a week, me giving half a week, the interns giving half a week. I think, cool things are coming. So stay tuned to Speak Life.
I think it would also drastically reduce my blood pressure levels during the LIVEcast as I'm frantically trying to queue up this, queue up that, hit the right thing, not hit the wrong thing.
Right.
Cut something off in the middle that I can't then get back.
Yes. Yes. We need to separate Paul the producer from Paul the presenter. That would be important. So our opening monologue was all about just one story. You could pick almost any story on any day, and it sort of has this theme to it. There is something that happens, and then there's an outrage machine that's called social media that kind of kicks in, and it is particularly sensitive to the emotion of outrage, anger. And it's the quickest way that you can virtue signal. It's the quickest way that you can signal to everybody else you're on the right side of history, you have the right views, and you're dead against this guy here. And that story just snowballed, really, the Peterson one. Did you follow any of it?
Yeah, I picked it up a little bit through seeing a post about, I think it was something you tweeted, and then someone's response to that, and then kind of just saw how it went on. But we were talking earlier and saying, you said what you asked me what I thought about all this stuff, and my answer was just, Yeah, like it's. I mean, I don't know if I'm in a minority, but I just see these things and I think, yeah, of course everybody's doing it for a performance,
right?
You know,
yeah.
And so I would say for a long time, so I still use Facebook like quite a lot, like every day basically, but I don't post a huge amount. I use it for business and I share memes because that's how I communicate my emotions to the world. But I generally hit a point where I was just like, why am I posting anything about, like why do, even if I go somewhere nice, why do I need to post a photo about I've done it? Why does anyone actually care?
Right.
Because there's a lot of people, believe me, who I'm friends with, and they're posting stuff, and I think I don't care. Like, I'll be honest. I'm like, I don't care what you have for breakfast.
It's different though, like because Facebook has become a much more public-facing thing, rather than it's not like a WhatsApp group. Like you would share photos to a WhatsApp group, wouldn't you? In terms of your holiday, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well,
come on, have a heart, man. Come on.
I might.
Maybe not.
I don't know. I mean, I might share photos with my parents and be like, here's some photos of the kids, and like, this is what we're doing or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I might tag them in some photos on Facebook if I was doing that, but
yeah.
But just the day-to-day life stuff.
No, sure.
But I was saying on a kind of much more serious note, like, what do you like the other week? I generally, when I see things, I think, why? I don't know what to post. So I saw like the Christchurch stuff.
Right.
When obviously this terrible tragedy is happening, and you think or I think to myself, like, should I post something? Because I'm genuinely looking at this and I'm horrified by it, and you feel like you want to say something, but then there's a part of my head going like, but does anyone like, why am I? Whatever I say will seem really twee,
yes,
like and trite, just. Thoughts and prayers, and there's nothing wrong with thoughts and prayers, but it's just it just seems it's easy for everybody to say like, oh, isn't it terrible that something's happening? It doesn't have to be that situation, any situation, without actually making any difference at all. And I remember I once got really called out for because it was a while ago. It was years ago now. I think it was for the NSPCC. It was like, change your profile picture to a cartoon character from your childhood or something.
Right.
And I basically made a post. I said I posted and said something like, my suspicion was lots of people change their things. They don't give any money to the cause, and basically it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And loads of people really got on my back about it and were like, "Oh, I gave some money." And I still suspect though they're in the minority. I suspect a lot of people it's like when you put like a filter over your profile picture of like, a French flag after there's some things that have gone on, And I think to myself, I could do that, but like, why am I doing it?
Yeah, and it's become so caught up in the virtue signaling thing. Even if only 5% of posts are kind of virtue signaling, the other 95%, let's be generous, that the other 95% aren't virtue signaling, and of course everybody is virtue signaling all the time. It's kind of one of the big teachings of the Bible. But
yep, exactly.
Self-righteousness, self-justification is just hardwired into the human soul. But even if it's just entirely from the overflow of the heart, and your heart goes out and you want to express something, it just becomes tainted by the rest of the whole virtue signaling thing.
Absolutely. But then there's so then I'm sitting there going, well, I won't post anything. But then, as we were talking about earlier, it's like you're saying something by not saying something, And then I think I'm just neurotic, basically. Like, I'm sitting there going, if I don't post anything, what people might think, he's not posted anything, he clearly doesn't care. And then I'm like, to be honest, does anybody really care what I'm posting anyway? Like, why would I think I was important enough for anyone to notice?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to counselling now. Like,
this is what social media is doing to us. And in a minute, we're going to have a look at some clips from Alistair Roberts. So I interviewed Alistair Roberts yesterday, who is just an incredible mind and thinks very deeply about technology and social media issues. And we had a wide-ranging discussion about all these things. We're going to post the whole interview on Monday night. But we've got some clips for you here today. But just this week, in a private Facebook group, somebody said, quickly, can you count up all the evangelicals you know who have posted something about Christchurch and have offered thoughts and prayers? And I sort of said, why? My first reaction was, oh yeah, there's this person, this person, this person, this person. But then I kind of stopped myself and said, "Oh, why? Why do you want that?" And he said, "Well, I'm in a discussion with someone from a different theological stream, and they reckon that evangelicals don't care about the Muslim community, and I want to be able to say, no, there are all these expressions of thoughts and prayers." And it just becomes this kind of crass calculus of, weighing up Facebook posts.
And not only is it crass that you have to kind of compile your list and be that, but I mean, the person who is there going, also the person who's saying evangelicals don't care about the Muslim community, I kind of look at that and say, well, to be honest, it doesn't seem like you care, or it seems you're using this tragedy just to get one over on some theological opponent that you've got, which is equally as crass and ridiculous.
And we just don't know what's going on in the lives of anyone offline. All you see is Facebook posts, and that is a very, very small proportion of your life.
Well, for some people,
right? I mean,
there's a few people a little on the overshare,
right. But we've just had a sanctuary cafe for refugees in this town, and this is the first time we've mentioned it on online, and yet the majority of people coming to use this service would be Muslim, and yet I don't feel like posting that. I don't feel like, but then
also, like we're not really supposed to do our good deeds to be seen before others.
I've read that somewhere.
I think I've read that.
Yeah.
And so there's that thing, isn't it? When people are saying, I preached on that passage. I think it's on the
6?
I think it's on the Speak Life YouTube channel actually.
Yeah.
But I talk about how I just don't believe, and maybe this is controversial, and it was for a few people at church. I didn't believe there was such a thing as an altruistic act. Like I said, everybody's motivations somewhere deep down are selfish. So some people do things deliberately to be seen by others, to virtue signal, which is what the Pharisees were basically doing. It was a religious virtue signaling of the day.
Yeah.
I said, and I used the example. I said, maybe you're at a party and you conversation's finished and you're kind of just by yourself for a second, and you look around and you see there's lots of glasses, and you think to yourself, I could be helpful here. And your motivation at that point is just, I want to be helpful. And so without being asked, without drawing attention to yourself, you kind of go around and start collecting up some glasses, But there's this bit of us, isn't there, that as you do that, as you turn to go to the kitchen, you kind of just have a quick glance. Has anybody noticed? Has anybody noticed? Like, Paul's done that. He wasn't even asked,
Yeah.
Or even things where, and I said as well, there's stuff I do and I think to myself, nobody will ever know I've done that.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, go me.
Yeah.
Like, pat on the back, like how, and I'm not congratulating myself.
Yeah.
So your motives are always kind of.
I think by the flesh we can say that.
Yeah,
Every
absolutely. That's what I mean.
act.
Yeah.
I think supernaturally by the Spirit we can overflow, and our right hand can give, and our left hand doesn't even know about it.
Sure.
I think but that's the exception. That's the supernatural thing, the natural thing.
Yeah, and I mean, because I used an example, I think of like when you see the celebrity with the big check for the charity, and I just think like it's great that they've given all that money, but who are they? They're partly. It feels at least like they're helping themselves. Like, here I am being photographed with my big amount of money I've given. How good am I? And I'm just like, why do you need to be seen to be giving? That? Anyway, we're slightly.
Well, yeah. So Matthew 6 is what we're talking about, and I love, Jesus kind of goes right to the heart of all religions. Talk about giving. They talk about prayer. They talk about fasting. And Jesus says, okay. Chapter 6, verse 1, Matthew 6, verse 1, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues. Right?
I've taken that to heart, because I think if you look at me, you'd never think I was righteous. So,
Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And then he talks about prayer. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues. I love it. They love to pray standing in the synagogues to be seen by others. But your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And then with fasting, verse 16, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces. Imagine that. Imagine actually physically disfiguring your face so that everyone knows that you're fasting. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full, but your Father who sees what is done in secret, he will reward you.
The thing I said about those verses, and this is what makes social media very difficult as well, and even away from social media, is that you can be doing these things to be seen by others, or you could be doing them out of a good So let's take Christchurch. You could be genuinely moved and grieved by it, and feel you need to say something, and then there could be someone else who just feels they need to say something to be seen saying something. Right. But the problem is, on the surface, there's just you can't tell the difference. No, it all looks the same, pretty much.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking about the private group, because all of a sudden, all those friends of mine who had said something, I felt that they'd said it genuinely, but it had suddenly become sullied by this person who wanted to add it all up and make a point with it. And it's just, there's just so much virtue signaling, so much self-righteousness going on. And I guess with social media, the easiest... In fact, kind of the only thing you can do to kind of express yourself is express your views, really. I mean, you can talk about what you've done, and people can do that, but it does tend to be your views on things.
Yep.
And so you feel not only the pressure to post something, because you don't want to be the person who who doesn't care about Christchurch. You don't,
Yeah.
But then you're in the position, okay, what do I now say? Because we're in such a supercharged atmosphere where if I say the wrong thing...
Well, exactly. And that was another thing that happened the other week. I mean, I was talking about it. I think my mother-in-law was talking about it. I don't know all the details, but it was to do with Diane Abbott. And there was another MP who'd stepped in to defend her. And I think she'd referred to Diane Abbott as being coloured. Right. And then loads of people jumped on her back.
Yes.
Because they were saying she's not coloured, she's black. And she was like, well, hang on a second, I was defending her. I was helping her out here. And you're just like, shooting your own team almost.
Totally shooting your own team. Because apparently, person of colour, fine. Coloured person.
Well, we were having this discussion the other day, actually.
Can we edit that? We can't edit that.
It's too late. It's out there now.
Too late. It's out there.
Well, we was having that discussion the other day and saying, like, as a kind of teenager, it was very much the case. You shouldn't say coloured,
right?
Because we're all coloured.
Yeah.
So black people, white people.
Basically.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. And then recently, it has become POC, people of person of color, people of color. But even I hadn't quite twigged that you couldn't say coloured. You can only say person of color.
Yeah.
And I
can't keep up.
Well, exactly.
And so much of it is down to, well, how much are you willing to cut the person some slack? How much are you willing to interpret their words in the most charitable light? And how much do you actually want to pounce?
Sure, absolutely.
And deride and denounce and smear, because it's a quick gain, right? That's the bigot over there, and who's with me, and where's my Twitchfork mob, and away we go. One of the things that we've thought about, especially in the last couple of days, is this issue of huge if true online, and I see it all the time. There's a story, and no one's quite assessed the full details of it. But if it happens to be true, it's huge, right? To use a Donald Trumpism. And we live in an age of huge if true, and it's the huge bit that we are most interested in, and the if true can kind of take the hindmost, really. And if one thing kind of epitomizes that, it's Robert Mueller's investigation into the Trump administration and whether they colluded with the Russians in order to hack the 2016 election. And for 22 months, that investigation has been going on. And it would be huge if true, but then what do you do with that? Do you jump the gun and basically say Trump is going to be impeached, definitely? And is that the story? Certainly, that's the line that a lot of people went down. And so we've got a montage of lots of people kind of jumping the gun on the Mueller investigation. Let's have a look at that.
Indictments in this president's future.
That's a bombshell.
The bombshell.
This bombshell.
Drop the bombshell.
Bombshell accusation.
Bombshell accusation.
And at that point, we are in high crimes and misdemeanor, and we are in impeachment territory.
Right.
This president needs to be impeached.
Impeachment is the remedy. I mean, the president can't...
It's the only remedy.
There's outright treason. I mean, there is no question.
I think he's feeling the noose around his neck.
The noose is tightening. And I think they're shocked that the noose is tightening.
He may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing. Oh, my God.
Okay.
So jumping the gun.
Yep.
And that's been going on for 22 months. And then the Attorney General's report on the Mueller investigation was released yesterday. And on the question, did Trump conspire with Russia to hack the elections? The answer was no. On the question, did the president obstruct justice? The answer was insufficient evidence. But for 2 years, we've heard people kind of, jumping the gun on those conclusions. And it strikes me that doesn't really help your cause, because now people are saying that this has been like the greatest moment of the Trump presidency.
Yeah.
He's not a traitor, which is a fairly low bar for greatest success.
I mean, that would be a good start for someone.
It would be a good start.
Like, don't be a traitor.
Yeah.
But as the pinnacle.
As the pinnacle, and it's not the pinnacle of his presidency, but when people start saying it's the best day for him because he's not actually a traitor, it's all the fault of those who are kind of piling on in advance and jumping the gun and saying huge, if true, and it probably is true. It's their fault, that this is now such a great day for him. But that whole movement was sort of the mirror image of the lock her up movement about Hillary, during the 2016 presidential campaign. And we just got both sides just jumping to conclusions and handling the huge if true moment not optimally, shall we say. So I just thought I would talk to Alistair Roberts a little bit about some of this huge if true stuff. And get some of his reflections on that. Like I say, we'll show the entire interview with Alistair Roberts next Monday night. But in this portion of the interview with Alistair, I just ask him about what we do with something like the Mueller investigation. What do we do when the facts aren't yet in and the scandal is just in the air? Let's see what he says. For 2 years, we've had a kind of a huge if true situation, and on the narrow issue of did Trump conspire with the Russians, the answer seems to be no. But I wonder if we have handled that issue on social media correctly, or whether that's going to put things to bed. Do you have any hope that this investigation will put that question to bed?
Oh, it's not going to put that question to bed. I think when we're looking, particularly someone like President Trump, he is the first president to really be that active on Twitter. And his activity on Twitter also leads to questions of where does the word of the president end and the word of Donald Trump begin? When is he speaking in his professional capacity, when not? And that's also a problem for many pastors. That pastors and church leaders online, it's very difficult to discern where the bounds are. And in the past, you'd have formal, public, official speech would be the sort of speech that you engage in from a pulpit. But now the sorts of speech that we engage in on Twitter, I can reach hundreds of thousands of people on Twitter. And I can say something that spreads out to that multitude without necessarily taking the sort of responsibility that I would do if I was standing up in a pulpit. Now that, I think, leads to the way that we handle these issues, that we don't have a sense of responsibility. And so we easily spread things as a sort of, there's little friction. Whereas if you have a more authoritative structure, there is friction because there's responsibility and accountability. If you say the wrong thing, you will be held accountable. You might lose your job or something like that. That's not quite the same online, where you can spread a rumor, you can spread some conspiracy theory, whatever it is, and not actually face consequences for that. So when social media has become our primary conduit for news, it makes a situation that is just ripe for these sorts of theories to spread without any sort of testing first. And the speed of it as well, that in the past, for instance, if the prime minister had to cast judgment on a particular issue, they'd often have days to do so. Something would happen on the other side of the world and the news would take over a month to reach us. And now they'll have to answer first thing in the morning. They may not even have time to get dressed before they're expected to have a formulated opinion on a matter. And it's the same on Twitter. It's just not a healthy situation.
Just not a healthy situation. Yeah. I thought it was really striking the way, it's very easy to talk about Trump and his Twitter usage, but instantly Alistair was all into, well, what about us? And what about church leaders who, you don't really know where the pastor ends and the private individual with an opinion about Brexit begins?
Sure. I mean, having like, and you don't have to be a pastor, just working for a church, I think, was one, even for me. So as a youth worker, I've often said, like, not necessarily on Facebook, but I did talk about Facebook, but even just going to church, like, imagine I'm the youth worker, and you're going to a service. It's not anything to do with your youth work. Reality is you're still on duty.
Yep.
Like, there is no end.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever we want to say is you can't switch off. Like, if someone comes up to you and says, I'm going to ask you something, you can't just say, sorry, I'm not on duty right now.
Yeah.
You know. Well, there are people who do that. I'm sure there are vicars who act like that. But But you kind of have to accept that there is no end. There is this continual blurring between.
Yeah, you have a role.
You have a role. You're always in that role, even if you're just sitting at home on Facebook at like 11 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. You're
angry,
still
posting.
Yeah.
You're
posting memes,
as the Reverend Glen Scrivener. Like I remember the first Sunday at All Souls Church Eastbourne, where I'm, I still go, but I'm not on staff. But it was the first day on staff, and the first Sunday, and went afterwards. And after the evening service, we went to this guy's house, and we were just all having a conversation about. And Darren Brown came up, and there was like a show that had just been on. And I just
right. So I thought when he was there,
Darren Brown wouldn't that be great?
I was like, Darren Brown.
We pray for that. We
just
pray
in
for
Eastbourne,
that.
like out for a drink.
Bring him back to church. He did go to church for many years, but and I just said something about Darren Brown, and I just sensed the whole room going, oh, so that's what the clergy think about Darren Brown. I was like, no, I'm speaking ex cathedra. I'm not. I'm not.
My views are not mine of my employers.
It's just like I'm just having an opinion about some guy on TV, but you just get that sense that people, but it's true, and when people read my Twitter account, they're it shouldn't just be frivolity. That's what my other Twitter account is for, called Scrivolity. But
I just rest safe in the knowledge no one is reading my Twitter account. So
you never know. When they ask you to present the Oscars,
they'll go back. They'll go through it with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah. And Alistair talked about the speed issue as well, with social media just speeds everything up, and and it's a quote from before the internet age, but a lie travels around the globe while the truth is still getting its shoes on. But how much more is that the case, in a social media age?
Well, what do you not? I mean, the thing I've thought about this a few times. You never hear someone like who gets stopped in the street, or you don't really hear people just saying, you know what, I don't really know what I think about that right now. I need to think about it a bit more. Yes, yeah. It's like, particularly if you're a public figure, right? Because if you've said that, then you'll be publicly crucified. Wouldn't give a comment on this. Yeah. I think we want to. It's good to take stock sometimes, isn't it, and stop and say, I need to think about that a bit more. Right.
And that's what we're saying about the Mueller investigation. Maybe a lot more journalists, in fact, all of them should have said, well, let's wait for the facts to come in, and if true, it is huge. Bang. Right. And if not, then, let's not waste 22 months stirring up and precipitating a scandal. If we don't know that it's true, but if that's true for them professionally, how much more should it be true for us? Yeah, absolutely. Personally, but we are asked to make opinions and have judgments about things all the time. I watched Leaving Neverland recently, so allegations of two men in particular who claim that Michael Jackson sexually abused them when they were children, and the whole program is wanting you to make a verdict about these things. Yeah. And again, I talked to Alistair Roberts about that, and he's got some great wisdom on it. So do tune in on Monday. But it's very good not to rush to snap judgments. Unless you've investigated. If you've investigated, okay.
Sure. But, and I mean, actually, we just watched the Disappearance of Madeleine McCann documentary on Netflix, and it's quite a long thing. It's 10 episodes. I think it was about an hour long each. So it's quite an in-depth thing. And and my wife had started watching it before me. She was a couple of episodes in, and I watched one and missed one and came back, and whatnot. And she didn't seem to know like much about the case. I think I knew a bit more about it than her, because at one point I said, oh, well, a lot of people think the parents did it because they found blood in the car and stuff, and that hadn't come up in the documentary yet. That was like a couple of episodes further down the road. And I was like, yeah, and there was all this stuff about that, and it was really weird and quite suspicious and yada yada yada. And then it got to that episode, and I kind of sat through it and watched it, and like you just see how it's complete nonsense. Like the car, it was like they had some dogs, you know, that sniff for stuff, you know, blood and bodies and things. The car was rented like 25 days after she went missing, and the DNA stuff was completely inconclusive. They said it could have come from any family member, possibly a mixture of the family members there. You know, there was literally no way they could tie it and say it was this person and not, you know, it was Madeline and not anyone else. Yeah. And so it was completely debunked, like thoroughly debunked. And yet still I went on Facebook and someone had posted something about like a meme, you know, or something. There was some going around about Madeleine McCann, and you go in the comments and someone's just saying, here's what they did. I reckon they killed her earlier in the day. They put her in the car. They drove yada yada yada. And you're going, hang on, they didn't even have the car, you know, and stuff like that. And people just have got this thing in their mind saying like, oh, they did it. Man, and this is it. And you look
imagine
at
if it happens in a Twitter age, because it happened in 2007, didn't it?
Yeah, 2007 it was. Yeah, and then it was that or 8.
And,
but then, you know, and also one of the police officers who was, I mean, you really got the idea of how horrific the Portuguese police had been in their investigation. I mean, just such poor levels of investigation. But there was a British police officer, and he was just saying, like, you know, he's dealt with lots of stuff like this. He said, if people have done this kind of crime, he said, the last thing you want is to keep drawing attention to your situation. You want this thing to blow over and get back to your life so you can hide away. And he said these guys were constantly just, even now, you know, 12 years down the road. And you're sitting there as a parent as well going like, you know, watching this and thinking, what must they have been going through? But people have made their conclusions. And I was just thinking, there was a guy on it in the very last episode, he's talking about, he was from an American organisation that find missing children and exploited children. And he was talking about people who've been found after like 23 years. That was kind of the longest one, or, you know, 12 years, 10 years, 4 years, and they've come back. And I was just thinking, like, I wonder what will happen if she ever does resurface. I wonder if those people will turn around and say, oh, I was wrong. It wasn't the parents. You know, I reckon there's going to be a lot of silence on Facebook and Twitter at that stage. Whereas at the moment, everybody's got something to say. Yeah, and we should say, I don't know. I don't know. Wait and see. I don't know. You know, and maybe we'll never know on that one. Yeah. But I do think it would have been, I dread to think, like, if it actually happened now. You know, in 2019, and there are abductions that happen, you know, every year, but that's such a high-profile case with people just, you know, are you with us or are you against us? And that's where things start to polarize online, and you feel like you need to pick a side. And in this second clip with Alistair Roberts, I talked to him about how we've gotten to this state and what is it about social media that does kind of supercharge our need for self-justification and anger. Let's have a look at that.
Whereas increasingly we're defined by a projected image that we are giving of ourselves online. And when we project that image, we can feel very threatened if people push against that. And I've talked about virtue signaling in the past. People often talk about virtue signaling as if it's something only a small group of people do. But online, we're all virtue signaling.
Haven't they read anything by Jesus?
We're all actually projecting some sort of image of ourselves, saying, this is who I am. This is my profile. This is, and that makes things very difficult. It means that if you challenge someone online, often you are seen to be challenging not just their ideas, but their identity. Because what you say is not just a statement about what you believe, it's also a statement about who you are, to a degree that it isn't when you're talking to someone in day-to-day life, where you have a clearer sense of the values, the form of life, the context, the community that surrounds them, and all these different sorts of belonging that give them a clearer sense of identity. Without that, you're defined entirely by what you say.
Yes, and therefore your identity is tied very much to your views, and therefore you have to say the right thing. And saying the right thing, capital R, capital T, is absolutely paramount.
You're branding your own identity, and you're creating your own brand. And if you say the wrong thing, you have to engage in some sort of PR relations management and public relations management, or you need to say the right sort of apology, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It just is not a healthy situation. Whereas in actual day-to-day life, it's worth thinking about what things we don't see online. You don't see the way that people relate to their neighbors. You don't see the sort of charitable work that people do. You don't see a lot of forms of social need online. You don't see disability for the most part online. You don't see age online. You don't see poverty for the most part online. And in all these different ways, we become closed in upon ourselves.
A lot of wisdom from Alistair Roberts, and do stay tuned for that interview with him, about 45 minutes, and it's solid.
It's going to be good. It just seems so relevant to today.
Yeah, he was an early adopter in every form of social media. He's got a really interesting story. So he tells some of that story, and then
was he there on Bebo?
He was. I don't know. We didn't speak about Bieber.
Fighting for his top MySpace places.
He made me so nostalgic for blogging. He's just like, remember blogging back when it wasn't supercharged by social media?
It's all vlogging now, isn't it?
It's just, oh man, it's all this kind of nonsense. So yeah, check it out on Monday night. Can't wait to share it with you guys. But last night's Monday night video was Paul Feasy, a young, fresh-faced preacher from Crowborough. So fresh, so face. And you were preaching on Revelation 4.
Yeah, Revelation 4. Yeah, it's part of a series. I'm really pleased, actually, because I've bemoaned often, not just my own church, but so many churches say, we're going to do the book of Revelation, and what they mean is we're going to do the 7 churches and then stop. And we might look at the last chapter of the Bible, but chapter 21 or 22 if we get lucky. And actually, we're carrying on, which is great. So I was quite excited to be doing it and for the church to be doing it.
Very good. Let's read it. Let's read it. Revelation chapter 4. The throne in heaven. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven, and the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second was like an ox, the third had a face of a man, the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 7 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." So it must have been a great joy to prepare from these 11 verses. What kind of struck you most as you were preparing?
Well, the biggest thing straight away was this idea of the throne, because I think it crops up 13 times, the word throne, and then it's about 5 more times on into chapter 5. And so anytime you see something repeated as much as that in the Bible, you're thinking, right, there's definitely some emphasis here.
Yeah.
So that leapt out particularly straight away, and then over time it was just trying to get my head round. Because I said to someone else, so I'm doing this passage, and in my head I had this thing about the throne and God being in control before I'd really put much thought into it. And someone else, I said I'm doing this passage, and they went, "Oh yeah, well, it's just about worship, isn't it?" And then I was like, "Oh, it's about worship." I was like, And of course you've got the creatures and the elders worshipping, and I'm trying to think. So for me, I mean, in terms of the way I preach, you'll never hear me preach a 3-point sermon with kind of 3 headings.
Excellent.
If that's your style, that's absolutely fine, but it's not mine. So I'm very much of the opinion that when I preach, I have 1 point. And it may be that there are these kind of 3 things, or maybe more or less. But I think it was Michael Wilcock, when he was at the ministry training course here in Sussex, kind of said it's a bit like preaching is a bit like you're baking a cake or something. You've got all the ingredients. And And I kind of feel that, like, your 3 points are like your ingredients, but for goodness sake, make me the cake at the end, you know. And often it can feel like you've got these 3 headings, which are kind of, and they're vaguely tied together. But for me, if I do get like 3 kind of sections or headings, I then want to work out how can I make one sentence out of these, which isn't, you know, 100 words long, but how do I sum this up in the simplest possible form? Because I'm of the opinion that generally people only really take away one big idea,
if that, Paul.
Well, exactly. So I like to go down that road, and it might, you might build towards it with some kind of here are some ideas, but you've got to bring it together. At the end, it's got to be
one thing, and you know, maybe there's a 3-in-1ness going on here. Maybe we can't maybe we cannot conceive of the 3-ness without being brought to the unity. I mean, it is just like your most boiled down sentence is subject, object, verb, right?
Right.
So there are kind of 3 elements to the most basic sentence that you can come up with. So you know, maybe the people who are the 3-pointers, what they lose often can be that unifying one. What's your one sentence?
So I mean, because actually what I end up doing, and it's just the way I was taught to do things. Is actually you end up with kind of 3 sentences. So the first thing is always working out what's the main point, and that's your big your sentence. You know, this is what it is. And then from that one sentence, you're kind of working out what your intro will be. So you're coming up with another sentence, which was called the empathy section.
Okay.
So you're always kicking off your talk with empathy.
Right.
So you're kind of saying you need to relate something that's related to the main point, that maybe the main point answers or addresses. So you kind of set up this kind of, don't we all feel like this? Haven't we all experienced this? Or here's this question, isn't this the case? And then you're showing how this passage then answers this reality of our lives. And I think, I mean, I've been doing that for years anyway, but then it was in Tim Hawkins' Messages That Move. He talks about the idea of like, when you're preaching, you're like a train driver, and basically you can't just get the train to the destination. You can't just have the main point, because if you've left everybody at the station and people didn't bother to get on the train to come with you, you've wasted your time. So at the beginning of the talk, you have to say to people, this is why it's worth listening to what I'm about to say to you, because I'm going to answer this thing. This is relevant to your life, so you're kind of setting that up. And so I'm a big, again, I was going to say I hate, that's a strong word. I really, I dislike the sermons that begin with, when they say, today we're going to see how yada yada yada, and they basically tell you what the main point is at the beginning.
Right.
And punchline first, and I say, there's no point me even listening now. I know that's not quite what I think, but but the guy who was when he was teaching about preaching, he was very much saying like it is like telling a joke, and you want people to be waiting for what's the answer. You've set up this thing. Tell me, I need the answer for this in my life. You know, and if you just throw it at them straight away, people go, okay, great, and so you want people kind of hanging on what you're saying.
I think we're both similar in that we have a low tolerance for people who are not grabbing our attention.
I think that would be true. Yeah, I mean, I always think the worst thing I mean, I would always be devastated if I felt that I'd done a talk that was just boring. Like,
that's
it's just
worst.
Inexcusable in my mind to be boring when you get up and preach.
Yes.
Like, and that doesn't mean you have to be all singing or dancing.
But I think because I desperately want someone to grab me when I get into the pulpit, that's desperately what I want to do. You know, I desperately want to grab people and get them aboard the train, you know.
Yeah, and how many times have we probably all had those moments where we felt like the preacher was speaking to us, like they've grounded it so clearly in our lives that you go, right, I've got to pay attention. You know?
Well, you've set the bar very high now, Paul, because we're all going to watch your sermon, and if you get distracted even for a moment,
this is just a conclusion, so you won't have got on the train yet. So you know, this is like watching the train go through the station.
But if people want to check out the whole sermon, it was posted last night on YouTube. It'll be posted tonight on Facebook. But what I really loved was the way you got to the station. And what I want to see now is your conclusion, and then ask you a question about why you concluded a sermon on Revelation 4 like this.
Okay.
People have sometimes summed up the whole book of Revelation with just 2 words. Jesus wins. And the ESV study guide, study Bible, really helpfully starts every book with a kind of explanation of some of the themes and ideas. And it says this about Revelation. I just thought it was so helpful. Revelation unveils the unseen spiritual war in which the church is engaged. The cosmic conflict between God and his Christ on the one hand, and Satan and his evil allies on the other. In this conflict, Jesus the Lamb has already won the decisive victory through his sacrificial death. But his church continues to be assaulted by the dragon in its death throes, through persecution, false teaching, and the allure of material affluence and cultural approval. So Jesus wins. Jesus has decisively won the war. He came to earth and he took on every enemy on the battlefield and he beat them. He came up against temptation and he beat it. He came up against sickness and he beat it. He came up against the forces of evil and he cast them out. He came up against the chaotic forces of nature and he calmed them with a word. And then on Good Friday, it looked like he'd been defeated. It looked like death had claimed him, the final enemy. But then 3 days later, he rose to life. Death couldn't hold him down. And he broke Satan's power. So Satan struck at his heel, but Christ delivered that killing blow to the head. And so the war is won. The war is won, but the defeated enemy is going to keep fighting battles to the end. Satan is in his death throes, but a creature that's in its death throes can still do a lot of damage. And if you get close enough, you can get mortally wounded. And that's what Satan wants. He wants to take as much of this world and as much of this church with him as possible. And so John says in this passage, and actually all through Revelation, see reality. Who's on the throne? God is on the throne. Jesus wins. The universe ultimately dances to the beat of God's drum. No one else is. So don't be a fool. Cast your crown before the one who is worthy, the one who is seated on the throne. No one else and nothing else.
There you are. Are you sure that was an Anglican church? You looked exactly like an FIEC church leader, right?
Yeah, I'm going to get some tattoos just to show that I've got a history. Like
Mars Hill, Seattle or something. But yeah. No, I loved the way that you concluded that sermon. And I'll tell you why. You preached Jesus and the Lamb winning in a sermon from Revelation 4. Now, Jesus, in a sense, the Lamb comes in chapter 5.
Well, yeah, that was absolutely in my head.
Yeah.
Because I very much looked ahead to, you see a figure by the throne standing like the one who is slain.
Yes.
A lamb,
Yeah.
And, I was very aware in my mind as I was going through this. It'd be really easy to get to the end of this whole preach and not have mentioned Jesus.
Right.
And I generally have a rule. Like, if I've not mentioned Jesus, I've probably not done a very good job.
Yeah.
Like
Spurgeon said, bring me a Christless sermon, but you may as well bring me flourless bread.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But go. Sorry.
I see that rule being applied to the Old Testament.
Oh,
because we've learnt the rule. We've learnt that you can't preach from Judges 13 without at some stage, at the end of the very, very end of the sermon, saying, and it makes us wonder, is there another ruler, another judge?
Yeah.
And you do like 3 sentences on Jesus because there's a rule, right?
Yeah. Well, and in fairness, see, and I did feel as I was writing this, am I just kind of crowbarring Jesus in a little bit at the end here, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine as well, with like when people just go, and here's 3 sentences on Jesus.
Yeah.
Tick. Whereas there are lots of passages, I would say, in the Old Testament where I feel like, we've been reading Ezekiel, and we keep seeing the glory of God in the likeness of a man, and it's, he said, the glory of God, he said.
Yeah.
And we're going, well, who is the visible image of the invisible God? It's Christ. And so as I read that, I think if I was preaching on these things, I'd just be like, Christ, 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 all the way through. It's not kind of like, oh, and by the way, it's probably Jesus. But never mind.
Yeah.
But... So there was an element even with this because I think if chapter 5 wasn't there, I would be quite comfortable saying the one on the throne that's being described is Jesus, and there's a kind of truth in that you've got this Trinitarian thing going on, but yet I know in chapter 5 you do see this other figure, who is set to the side slightly,
he is,
around the throne, and so I was hesitant to just be like. Jesus is on the throne, because I don't think that's quite what the passage says, even though I agree. we're seated on the throne.
It's partly because chapter divisions have totally stuffed it up for us, hasn't it?
Sure,
because, chapter 3 verse 21 says that Jesus has sat down on his Father's throne, and he invites us to sit down on his throne too. So he is a different figure, but he shares the same throne.
Yeah, and I guess that's difficult with that's part of the difficulty of the kind of symbolic descriptions you get, that you end up kind of having this very literal picture in your head of what it must look like.
And then chapter 5, and again, the chapter division between 4 and 5 is totally artificial. It was just invented so you could navigate your way around the Bible.
Yeah.
A little bit. So, in one sense, I wouldn't want to preach on Revelation 4 without Revelation 5. But even if I was just given that passage, it begins with the voice that John had been hearing, which is Christ's voice.
The first voice he hears.
And he is in the Spirit, so through the Son and by the Spirit, he's presented to the Father. And as long as you're talking about in Christ and by the Spirit,
I wish I'd said that.
In Christ and by the Spirit, then do a sermon on the Father. But you can't do a Revelation sermon without talking about the Lamb winning.
No.
And I think to divide 4 and 5 up is just it's so obviously not what you're meant to do, because it's one scene.
Right. Yeah.
So therefore it's totally legitimate, to finish your sermon with the Lamb, because there's no way that if you were, in the first century receiving this letter to the 7 churches,
and we'll read the rest tomorrow.
Yeah, wait 7 days. I'll tell you what happens next. No way.
Yeah.
No way. So I think there's a vital importance for preaching Christ in the New Testament. I bang the drum. I bang the drum for preaching Christ in the Old Testament. But honestly, I get some people who then go, oh, okay, there's a rule. All right, in the Old Testament I'll preach Christ. And then they preach Revelation 4 Christlessly. And they preach Mark 13, the end times, Christlessly, or the fruit of the Spirit Christlessly, or the entire book of James Christlessly.
Yep.
And the only reason, because they think that the point of a sermon is the New Testament. If you're in the Old Testament, you've got to get to the New Testament. And if you're in the New Testament, well, you don't need to get anyway. You're fine. Whereas the point of both Old and New Testament is to point to Christ. It's not that the Old Testament points to the New Testament. It's that both Old and New point to Christ. Therefore, yes, it's important in Judges 13 to get to Christ, but it's also important in Revelation 4.
And I think as well, and I'm happy to discuss with people thoughts on this, but there's also an idea, isn't there, that when we're saying, we must always point people to Christ, what sometimes people read that as, we must always kind of get in a few sentences about penal substitution and the cross.
Right.
And I'm just not sure that's quite...
No.
I mean, Paul wants to preach the cross, Christ crucified. But
not every time he mentions Christ crucified does he mention penal substitution.
Sure, absolutely. And I think if you're teaching Old Testament, if you were teaching Ezekiel, it would be a bit odd to just go, this figure is Jesus. And let's just quickly give a quick gospel outline.
Yes.
With my however many, let's do 3, 2, 1 or 6 boxes of 2 ways to live quickly. That would be unusual. There are other things you can point to about who Christ is.
Right. And there's other models of the atonement. So even though penal substitution is absolutely at the heart, there are other models of the atonement and other ways of preaching Jesus. So preaching Jesus from Ezekiel 1 and just seeing the glory of God's, presented as this glowing, radiant man who is like the sun, who is the light of the world. You've warmed hearts with Christ there.
And I think I remember, if my memory's correct, I remember preaching Isaiah 6 and just saying John says, who is Isaiah seeing? He's seeing Jesus. And for me, that's an absolute joy, to see that.
Yeah. The one seated on the throne in the temple vision.
Yeah, this isn't a theological kind of, isn't this a nice little theological idea we've managed to pull out of the text, then actually this is here's a Christophany or all this kind of stuff. You're like, this is really important stuff, that here's Jesus in the Old Testament, he is the one who's on the throne, and Isaiah saw his glory, and that's massive, and that should really, that's not a secondary thing, that's a pretty driving foundational thing through as you're speaking about who this God figure is, particularly in the Old Testament.
And I think I love Isaiah 6 because you've got the king, the Lord, high and lifted up on the throne. And then the next time you see someone high and lifted up in Isaiah is Isaiah 53.
Right, yeah.
He's high and lifted up and greatly exalted and on an altar. So he's high and lifted up on the throne and he's high and lifted up on an altar. And absolutely you can preach Christ and him crucified through
from that. Yeah.
But Isaiah 6 I always go to and kind of say, He's both present and he's promised and he's patterned, you know, in Isaiah 6. He's present as he is the Lord on the throne there. He is promised because at the end it's about the holy seed who will come, and he is the true remnant of Israel to make them fruitful again. And he's also patterned, you know, just as Isaiah says, woe is me. Well, it's the burning coal from the altar that actually, you know, cleanses him and restores him. And so you've got Christ promised, you've got him present, promised, and patterned there. And I don't mind if you've preached Christ just present, or just promised, or just patterned. And I don't mind if you don't necessarily preach penal substitutionary atonement. But let's preach Jesus.
Yeah.
You know? He is the...
And I mean, it literally, I mean, I do find it literally one of the most thrilling things of reading the Old Testament is going, like, it's almost like, sometimes I feel like, it's a bit like, where's Wally? And going, where's Jesus? There he is.
Yeah.
I found him. Like, and it's really, but the thing is, he's not hidden. I don't think he's hidden at all.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. Some people, you get the idea that, you know, Jesus is there if you look hard enough. But there's so many times when I read and I just go, well, it's so obvious. And even like Moses at the burning bush, you know, and I can't remember if it's in Exodus. Well, it's not in Exodus. It must be later in the New Testament. So, you know, Christ spoke to Moses through the bush. And you're like, well, who's in the bush? You're like, you know, all these things, or, you know, Abraham and the various angel of the Lord type figures. And
this is why people need to read Long Story Short from Christian Focus by Glen Scrivener. You can go and get that.
It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff.
It's all good stuff. Bill Lovell, hello, Bill from Texas.
Having his breakfast.
The clocks have changed, so maybe
might finish breakfast.
He's
might be
discovered a meal between breakfast and brunch. Who said that, people? For 10 points. Bill Lovell says, over a longer minute, you guys are both young. One of the greatest privileges for a pastor teacher is to preach this Sunday sermon in the light of last Sunday's sermon and last month's and last year's. That's true. But in UK circles, we tend not to just take a whole book, just have one preacher. If there's a church of any kind of size, they tend to share out the preaching quite a bit. And so so I preached on 2 Corinthians 5, the first half of it, last Sunday, and I was just thinking, and I'd love to have the second half of 2 Corinthians 5, but no, it goes to somebody else. And
it's a shame because we don't do a huge amount of that. But there's certainly things where you get your teeth into. I mean, something like Revelation.
Wow.
Where suddenly you get your teeth into a chapter and you think, it'd be great to keep going.
Yeah. And Bill goes on, over a longer ministry, your series on Isaiah is preached in the light of last year's series on John, and last year's series on John was in the light of the previous year's series on Revelation. The local congregation forms the context for all the teaching. So good to get that bigger.
I would be interested to know, like, if there is a model of that in church where people do a kind of, like, this term, you know, January to Easter, pretty much every Sunday morning the curate will do the sermon on the same book.
Yeah, the same preacher.
And then the next season will be the vicar or whoever. I wonder if there is anyone doing that. Maybe not quite such long things. I wonder whether there's benefits to doing that. There must be pros and cons. Like, I mean, obviously it'd be quite exhausting during it, but you get a rest period at the end, but you get the fluidity of having the context and knowing what you've said and building on what you've done. I don't know.
No, I like that. So you get Colossians, and you'll do that for the next 4 weeks, and then I'll get Jonah, and I'll do that for the next 4 weeks. And then someone else will get... I like that.
It'd be interesting to know whether people are doing that kind of thing and how it works and if it works.
Yeah. Good thoughts, everybody. Good thoughts.
Lovely thoughts.
Thoughts and prayers. Good to have your company, everybody. So this was the livecast for the 26th of March. If you want to check out Paul's sermon, you can find it on YouTube, on our channel, Speak Life UK. Do search for Speak Life UK and do subscribe to us on YouTube. That'd be great. And it'll drop on Facebook tonight. This will be a podcast coming out this Friday. Do you know that we have 2 podcasts? So this drops as a podcast. Do search for us in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And there's also Reading Between the Lines, which takes a phrase every day and basically sees Christ as the heart of all Scripture. And so you can go through from Genesis to Revelation. Do subscribe to that as well. People enjoy listening to that on their commutes and that sort of thing. But next week, on Monday night, we're going to have Alistair Roberts' video, and I'm going to be in the United States of America.
The
US of A. Yeah, so I'm going to be at the Gospel Coalition.
I'm expecting you to come back with like a flag, little
Yeah,
flag,
yeah,
and
yeah.
a MAGA hat.
USA, USA, America, America. So yes, I'll be
bum bag. You know,
fanny pack. It's a fanny pack, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'll be speaking at, doing a seminar, one of like 3,000 different seminars at the National Conference for the Gospel Coalition, and I'm going to see people like Claire Uhrig, who's watching now. Hello, Claire, and Wade, and meeting a few other people in Indianapolis, so that'll be great.
Nice.
And you'll be doing something here, won't you?
Yeah, but well, I won't. Not here, because this building will be gone.
Yeah, I hope you're not here.
Yeah, if I'm in here, I'm in trouble.
And then we will broadcast from another secret location.
Yeah.
In a fortnight's time. But yeah, until then, keep speaking life, people.
Absolutely.
God bless. Bye bye.
Take care. See ya.